I am a debunker of 9/11 conspiracy theories. AMA. Is there any part of a 9/11 conspiracy theories that you do agree with? Or anything at all you find suspicious about the 9/11 story? There are a lot of parts of the 9/11 investigation that leave a lot to be desired and are answers we'll probably never get. In almost every case they point to agency CIA, not foreknowledge or conspiracy, though. If we are talking about the physical events of 9/11, however, the official story has pretty much everything correct. For example, some rather rational people still say things like Flight 93 was probably shot down, but the evidence is fairly clear on the matter. Flight 93 was intact when it hit the ground. What's the deal with the Bin Ladens and their connection to Bush oil buddies, and the only plane allowed to fly on September 11th contained Bin Laden's family? Presidents have to be great networkers. What's the wildest theory you've seen thus far? What's your motivation for debunking the theories? Have you found anything that you can't come up with an answer for yet regarding the attacks? What's the wildest theory you've seen thus far? I don't like laughing at people who are obviously mentally ill, but fuck me, I've seen some crazy shit. One of the architects for 9/11 truth believes the towers came down with nuclear weapons. Some rather prominent people have floated the ideas that the planes were holographic, so-called no-planers. Some even crazier people have said that TV footage of the impacts of the towers were faked, that the planes never flew into the buildings. All the people who say they saw it are plants. Judy Wood, a PhD in engineering, thinks they were brought down by spaceborne laser weapons. What's your motivation for debunking the theories? I am a skeptic a la Carl Sagan. The motivation here is the belief that pseudoscience is dangerous and poor thinking should be combated. I started off by getting into evolution/creationism but eventually got sidetracked into 9/11. You can learn a tremendous amount by digging into a conspiracy theory and convincing yourself it is wrong. I cannot tell you how much I've learned about physics, politics, the world, and everything else. Have you found anything that you can't come up with an answer for yet regarding the attacks? No, not really. I have many unsatisfying answers and places where the public record isn't as complete as I'd like. So sometimes it comes down answers such as I cannot disprove what you are saying, but if it was true, all of this must also be true, and that theory is more ridiculous than my theory, so mine is more likely. So my question to you is, why do you debunk these theories? Is it a hobby, or do you view it as a service? And have you ever converted anyone? Also, what are your favorite 9/11 debunking resources? Screw Loose Change, Debunking 9/11, 9/11 Myths, etc. Yay, something is bunked. I hope my comments are showing up because I have some in my history that aren't on this page. The answer to your question is this. You learn a lot by convincing yourself a conspiracy theory is wrong. I actually go out and argue with conspiracy theorists for the same reason I argue with creationists. I think pseudoscience should be combated. I don't like living in a society with people who do not think clearly. And have you ever converted anyone? Yes. I and others have, collectively, recruited many. In fact, many of the current debunkers are former truthers. After taking down the Twin Towers, Bin Laden would have easily had a 25-kill streak and could call in a tactical nuke. Why would he not have that enabled as a killstreak reward? Do you think he's some kind of idiot? Maybe his level wasn't high enough for kill streak rewards. It really is depressing how many differently people have crazy theories about this stuff. I just spent the last 30 minutes reading most of this thread and I can't remember one person conceding they were wrong when presented with proof. How often do people actually give ground romance arrows? I admire your infinite patience. I would go nuts talking to a wall for hours. Rarely, but not because I can't. The truth is I know the conspiracy myth better than most conspiracy theorists. When they bring up their gotcha proof, 97% of the time, I already know more about it than they do. It's rare, but sometimes people do bring up something new, and I'll end up being wrong about. Here's an example. Very early on in the 9/11 stuff, I was a debunker who believed that molten steel could form in large quantities via friction during the collapse. Other people, mostly other debunkers, but some truthers, talked me down from that legend, convinced that no appreciable amount of molten steel could reasonably form, and so any strong evidence of molten steel would be counter-evidence for the official story. What's your take on the hijacker passport that was found on sidewalk around the trade centers within an hour of the plane striking the first tower? I remember it was reported by the media that day. My mom saw it too, and we talked about how unlikely that seemed. I did some Googling a few weeks ago and found that it's never been denied. I always wondered why it never got much attention from the truthers. Parts of a flight attendant's arms were found on the roof of a skyscraper adjacent to the Twin Towers, and they were bound, to boot. Although seemingly unlikely, it did happen. I'd wager that a crash of that magnitude would send anything and everything everywhere. Unlikely equals fictitious. Question: do you ever find people who accept and defend the pseudoscience explanations for 9/11, but simultaneously criticize the same behavior on other topics, evolution, global warming? Oh yes, constantly. In fact, almost always. Conspiracy theorists tend to be fairly secular. My guess is generally because they end up as religious fanatics, not conspiracy theories, if they are not. That means they tend to despise creationists. That's the reason I make constant analogies to creationism/evolution. I try to help them understand the analogies between their arguments and creationist arguments. Are you a government agent? No, but thanks for asking. Do you believe me? I have a mate who's a structural engineer for steel and concrete clad factory units, not dissimilar to the construction of the World Trade Center. I remember watching the news footage with him a couple of days after it happened in our local pub, and he was absolutely adamant then that the planes would not have been enough to bring those buildings down. To the point where he was getting so wound up about it, screaming bullshit at the TV, that we were asked to leave because he was upsetting the customers. Now when a good friend, who's usually quiet as a mouse and who's been in that game for over 20 years, is screaming foul, then you have to start asking yourself the odd question or two. You should tell your mate that the WTC was not a steel/concrete construction but a pure steel construction. The dissimilarities are staggering. In fact, it's been highly studied and seriously suggested that if the WTC had been built with steel-reinforced concrete, not just steel, that it would have survived, at least for orders of magnitude longer. In fact, concrete construction companies have been using it as an example of their method of construction superiority. However, none of that gets to the point. The point is we can both line up 100 people with various levels of expertise, show them the video, ask them what happened, and take a vote. At the end of the day, that doesn't mean much. The people at NIST wrote a very long and detailed report explaining exactly what they think happened after a lot of study. Has your mate read that report? What flaws did he find it? The scientific process is one of studying, finding conclusions, and peer review. All of them. My buddy is an engineer and watched the video, and the world doesn't overturn scientific consensus. The reason we invented the scientific method was because our intuition fails. Even expert intuition fails. That's why we do science. What is your explanation of the 5 dancing Israelis who were seen celebrating, high-fiving, and taking pictures of the towers as they burned and collapsed? Since you claim to be well versed in the subject, you're surely familiar with the Bergen record story on this topic? Not to mention the numerous follow-up stories that connected the 5 Israelis to a moving company that was reasonably believed to be a Mossad front operation. Additionally, as you surely know, one of the 5 Israelis stated, on Israeli television, after they were released, that they were there to document the event. How did they know in advance that there would be an event and know what it was? For extra credit, please address the hundreds of Israeli art students who penetrated the DEA and other federal offices, and the 4-part Carl Cameron series on Fox which ties in with these themes. Ah yes, the Yos. Here are the actual facts. 5 men were reported by one lady who thought they were filming and celebrating. They were picked up by the FBI. One went on radio and made a comment, see below, and Ian celebrating, FBI agrees, by the way. Some intelligence people believe they were probably Israeli espionage agents. The FBI was said repeatedly there is no evidence they had foreknowledge. The fact of the matter is we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. One reading of that is your reading. Their purpose, in America, was to document the coming terrorist attack. The other reading is, their purpose, while they were stopped on the bridge, was to document the burning buildings over there. You ignore the second reading, and pretend the first is true. You repeat that first interpretation as if it was fact. And yet, the FBI investigated and said they found no evidence of foreknowledge. So, now the Mossad and the FBI are involved. Or was it just the Israelis who infiltrated the FBI? How deep does it go? Let me be honest with you. The absolute craziest fricks around are the ones who blames the Israelis for 9/11, so please understand how much trepidation I approach this issue with. I'm not a 9/11 truther, but as most people should be, I'm still skeptical. I simply think we don't have the full story. Would you agree? Secondly, would you agree that Bush couldn't have justified the wars and etc. without 9/11? Finally, do country songs designed only to emotionally invest people in the war make you want to strangle someone as well? It depends which story and what we mean by full. We have the full story of the physical events of 9/11. The big pieces are all there. There are small details here and there that are unknown. The story will never be full and there are parts that are less supported than others, but all of the major elements of the story are extremely well supported. Secondly, would you agree that Bush couldn't have justified the wars and etc. without 9/11? Almost certainly. Would you agree that flying a single plane into the WTC, even if it didn't collapse, would have been sufficient for the wars? Finally, do country songs designed only to emotionally invest people in the war make you want to strangle someone as well? I'd use the word romanticize, but otherwise yes.